people will come and they'll say, well, how many people do you have on staff? And I'll say one part-time being Alex, and you're looking at the three of me. So I get some funny looks from time to time.
I'm Alex Bergstrom, trustee and heir to Crown Hill Farms through Lucian Gunderman. I help day-to-day things on the farm, managing cattle operations, fencing, everything from finance stuff all the way down to buying tractors.
The farm is a diversified operation. We run a large beef herd. We keep a few sheep as well. We have approximately 320 acres of timber that is managed. We're doing some thinning as we speak, salvaging down trees that went down last winter. I never married. There were no brothers and sisters. I was an only child. My mom was an only child, so it was giving a very limited amount of people that could take this over. And Alex had been working here since he was 12 years old. His dad and I were best friends in high school and remained, and I didn't have anybody else that we felt could handle this down the road.
Really started heavily up here when I was probably 16 years old, and that was right as they started getting the conservation easement going and things. I've been up here for a couple years, and they saw how hard of a worker I was.
So we sat down with him one day and said, you know, what's your plan for the future? How long do you want to be here? Well, he said, I'd like to be here as long as you'll have me. So that was just kind of the answer that we needed. So then we started doing up a trust agreement for him. We wanted to protect the property because my grandparents had come here and had been here for so many years. It's a unique parcel. It's got a lot of water throughout the property. Seeing the city of McMinnville moving closer and closer all the time, I don't think in my lifetime or Alex's that the city would be out here. Hopefully not. But we decided we needed to protect it, and the one way to do it was to put it in a perpetual conservation easement.
We want to keep it as a working farm as long as we can. It's hard to find places like this anymore that aren't divided up already, split up once someone marriage breaks up or a family member dies, the kids sell off all the property, and there's just nothing left. I've seen it happen time and time with friends of mine that were farmers, and now they're all living in the city and got no farms to go back to. So it's pretty sad to see, and with this place locked into that, it can never be like that even if I'm not here. So that's one great thing to having it in an easement like that.
It took us several years, actually, to get that conservation easement put together the way we wanted it. We talked to several land trusts, which we weren't overly hot on some of their restrictions and what they wanted us to do. And so we contacted the Amhill Soil and Water Conservation District, and they were interested in holding it. We, of course, had to have everything reappraised. Timber had to be recruised. All of the buildings, all of the property had to be reappraised, so there was a figure. And the charitable tax donation was a percentage. And I don't honestly remember what that figure was or what the percentage was, but it was a tax deduction that could be taken against current and future years' taxing. We spread it out so that there was, a longer period of time for that tax credit to actually take place.
A charitable deduction of an easement reduces your taxable income, which can preserve your operating capital. So the money you'd spend on taxes, you can put back into your business. A donor generally can take a charitable deduction of up to 50% of their adjusted gross income when they're making a donation to a qualified charity. And if they don't use that full charitable deduction in the year of the contribution, they can carry that deduction forward for 5 years. And conservation easements are special because the donor, if they are a farmer or rancher or commercial fisherman or forestry owner, they're allowed to deduct up to 100% of their adjusted gross income. And they're also able to carry that contribution forward for 15 years if they don't use it all up in the first year. The IRS actually has an audit guide for conservation easements, and there are specific qualifications laid out in the audit guide. Definitely the appraisal is the most important piece of documentation because the charitable deduction is based on the value of the property with and without restrictions. So the difference in the fair market value with and without the restrictions of the easement really is your charitable deduction. An appraisal should be performed by someone who's a licensed appraiser and who's met the licensing requirements and has the experience requirements necessary to just maintain that credential. And I think that in this case, an appraiser who's performed appraisals for conservation easements in the past would be the best choice.
Okay, so you've got a landowner that's seeking a charitable donation of a conservation easement, and he's going to need an appraisal to support that. There's two kind of key components to that. There's the qualified appraiser and a qualified appraisal. Then you've got to have a qualifying property. A qualifying entity has to hold that, like Oregon Ag Trust would be a holder of that easement. There's timing factors in there. So if you haven't gotten the easement done yet, we would need to be within 60 days of that donation being made, or we've got to look at going back and doing a retrospective appraisal on the property for that easement.
Accompanying the appraisal, you would need to obtain a contemporaneous acknowledgement from the donee organization, from the land trust, that affirms the property you contributed and the fact that you didn't receive any compensation for it. Or in the case of bargain sale of development rights, it would also stipulate what you did receive in exchange for your contribution.
A partial donation. That situation is typically born of not enough funding to pay cash for the complete easement value. So let's say your easement value is $1 million. The land trust has a commitment from the state for $500,000, and where do we get the other? Well, we don't have it. Would you donate the other half? And that's kind of how that in the long and short goes. And so same type of specs, same concept. And typically in that first appraisal where we're appraising for the easement between the land trust and the landowner, I'll put a nice big bold statement in there that this appraisal is not to be used for an IRS Section 170 deduction. This is not a qualified appraisal in that circumstance. Then we come back and we do the appraisal for the charitable contribution, where we have different criteria that we look at, like direct acquisitions of easements. That's where the land trust and the landowner have negotiated a price.
There's also a baseline study that should be completed. And what that does is it establishes what resources are in place at the time of the contribution so that it can be documented. And then there is the tax form that accompanies your tax return, a Form 8283. And depending on the size of the contribution, there will be various attachments that need to go with that. A couple of common circumstances that would be examined in an IRS audit would be either the value of contiguous parcels of land that increase because of the donation of an easement on an adjacent parcel, or if the value of the contribution is overstated by either inflating the full value of the land before restrictions or deflating the value of the land after the restrictions. The higher the value of the contribution, the more the transaction would be scrutinized. The IRS would be most interested in how you are appraising the value before and the value after the easement, because the taxpayer receives the most benefit by having a very high before value and a very low after value. As you're looking at tax planning, as you're looking at succession planning, it's going to be important that you talk to a group of professionals about it. You talk to your tax advisor, you talk to your estate planning attorney, your lender, your insurance professional, financial advisor, anyone else who you're going to rely on in terms of structuring the sale efficiently and passing on the assets and passing on wealth to the next generation. Communication with a lender is going to be essential. You won't get a tax deduction for a contribution of an easement unless the lender is subordinate to the organization receiving the easement. That may not fly with a lot of lenders, so it should just be a consideration. If your land's encumbered by a mortgage, bring that up early and see what options you have before going down the costly road of getting the appraisals and pursuing the donation further.
I guess the advice on someone that was looking at doing this is do some research, Certainly talk to private land trusts, get a good attorney that's familiar with conservation easements, get good appraisers. We were blessed to have very good appraisers out of Salem that, again, we got along well with. They know their stuff. They covered every aspect of what needed to be appraised and were fair in their appraisals. You've got to have a good crew, so to speak, to put everything together to make this work.